The next item of business is a statement by Ivan McKee on budget, provisional outturn 2024 to 2025. The Minister will take questions at the end of the statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the Minister up to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to update Parliament on the provisional outturn against the budget for the financial year 2024-25. The provisional outturn demonstrates once again that this Government is prudently and competently managing Scotland's finances while protecting our priorities and ensuring that we have sustained effective delivery of public services. Managing the financial position for 2024-25 was a challenge once again. The continued impact of inflation, pressure on public sector pay and wider geopolitical instability has meant careful consideration had to be given to balancing the Scottish budget. As members know, we cannot overspend our budget, even by a single penny, and we of course cannot underspend in excess of the Scottish Reserve limit of just over £700 million. Over and above this, we have limited fiscal levers and cannot borrow to meet day-to-day costs. Savings remain our main source to manage emerging pressures, with the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government setting out the difficult choices that were taken to Parliament in September of 2024. However, stronger overall provisional revenue performance from the fully devolved taxes than initially forecast, together with the additional funding received from the UK Government last October and the spending controls that were introduced, enable us to achieve the Cabinet Secretary's stated aim of removing all use of ScotWind revenues to support the wider budget in 2024-25. This has allowed us to target these revenues in investments on a range of net zero projects for the longer-term benefits for Scotland. Resource borrowing was also eliminated, reducing the cost of borrowing that future budgets will need to fund, while capital borrowing was significantly reduced. All these actions help us to ensure we remain fiscally sustainable. The outlook, however, is still challenging. New threats to economic stability continue to emerge at a global level. We continue to see inflation above the Bank of England target of 2%, and that puts pressure on public sector pay deals to ensure pay remains fair and competitive. The UK Government spending review announced on the 11th of June confirmed that the rate of growth in the block grant had fallen below previous expectations, growing by only 0.8% in real terms year on year, considerably lower than the 1.5% average growth in UK departmental spending. Changes to employer national insurance contributions have also not been fully funded for Scotland, and UK Government benefit policy changes are expected to have a significant negative impact on future years' fundings. The impact of these changes on our financial planning will be set out in the medium-term financial strategy tomorrow in Parliament, but the growing future year pressures mean we must act prudently and responsibly to remain fiscally sustainable. Despite these challenges, we have continued to deliver for Scotland. In 2024-25, we supported fair and affordable pay deals for workers who provided essential public services, thereby securing the continuity of those services and minimising the sort of costly action we saw in other parts of the UK. As the recent UK pay review bodies have demonstrated, current global socio-economic pressures are necessitating governments look beyond original budgeted costs. Through effective financial management, we have been able to offer pay deals that were £600 million greater than planned. We invested over £5.9 billion this year in social security assistance, directly supporting over 1.4 million people across Scotland. This includes £456 million allocated to the Scottish Child Payment, a benefit unique to Scotland, helping around 328,000 under-16s and lifting an estimated 60,000 children out of relative poverty in 24-25. Following successful pilots, the carer support payment and the pension age disability payment were extended nationally, ensuring carers and pension-age individuals with disabilities now receive regular support in all areas. We also introduced the Scottish Adult Disability Payment Allowance, replacing the UK's Disability Living Allowance and benefiting over 430,000 disabled people. Scotland's economy and labour market have remained resilient despite challenging economic headwinds. Scotland's economy grew 1.2% in 2024 compared to 1.1% in the UK as a whole, and strengthened from 0.5% growth in 2023. Scotland's claimant count unemployment rate was 3.5% in May and remains below the UK rate of 4.5%. And our median monthly pay for payrolled employees in Scotland in May was £2,542, remaining higher than the UK as a whole. Scotland continues to show the largest reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over the long term amongst the nations of the UK, and we are committed to achieving net zero by 2045. In 2024-25, we spent £16.2 million on Just Transition Fund activities, brought the new build heat standard into force, delivered an additional 1,623 EV public charge points and restored 14,860 hectares of degraded peatland. We also brought forward the landmark Circular Economy Scotland Act 2024, which establishes the legislative framework to support Scotland's transition to a zero waste and circular economy. This is complemented by a circular economy and waste route map to 2030, helping us to achieve our sustainable resource and climate goals. We have continued to support and deliver genuine efficiencies across the public sector, with a range of programmes saving money from corporate expenditure, including the National Collaborative Procurement Frameworks, Commercial Value for Money and digital programmes, which are securing cost-avoiding and cash-releasing savings expected to reach over £500 million up to the end of 26-27. In 24-25, we also launched property controls guidance to support a more efficient approach to public sector property management, optimising costs and estate footprint. Since 2022, enhanced recruitment controls introduced into the Scottish Government have controlled growth in the total workforce. From March 2022 to March 2025, the total Scottish Government workforce has reduced by 5%. Turning now to the 2024 provisional outturn, I am pleased to confirm that the Scottish Government has once again delivered a balanced budget with a provisional fiscal outturn for 2024 of £52.1 billion against a total fiscal budget of £52.7 billion. The remaining £557 million, which represents just over 1% of our total budget, will be carried forward in full through the Scotland Reserve if confirmed at final outturn. This incorporates £501 million of fiscal resource, £31 million of capital and £25 million of financial transactions. To reiterate once again, this results in no loss of spending power to the Scottish Government, with this funding supporting 2025-26 costs. We cannot overspend. The fiscal rules we must comply with mean we must plan for a modest underspend. We must be able to mitigate the risk of post-year end audit adjustments and to manage any late movements in demand-led programmes and fully devolved tax receipts, as have occurred in previous years. We already made clear our intention to set aside the majority of this underspend to Parliament as part of our spring budget revision, with £350 million planned and held within the finance and local government portfolio. Indeed, we operate on an annualised budget, but of course our activities do not abruptly end on the 31st of March and then recommence anew on the 1st of April each year. Smoothing through the Scotland Reserve over financial years is therefore to be expected. Managing the position to a 1% underspend underlines the financial competence of this government. I must also remind colleagues that there remains an element of our budget allocation which is non-cash and that is utilised for accounting adjustments such as depreciation. It is ring-fenced and cannot be used to support day-to-day spending. As non-cash, it does not flow through the Scotland Reserve and is therefore excluded from the headline provisional outturn results. For 2024-25, this was an underspend of £738 million against a budget of £1.8 billion. A large proportion of this relates to non-cash consequentials for student loan impairments, which are of course simply not required at the same level in Scotland because of our policy of free university tuition. Finally, the figures I am reporting to you today remain provisional, as they are subject to change pending completion of 2024-25 year-end audits. Finalised figures will be reported as usual in the annual Scottish Government consolidated accounts and a statement of total outturn later this financial year. Presiding Officer, I commend today's figures to this Parliament.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister will now take questions on the issues raised in his statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. I'd be grateful if members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons now. And I call on Craig Hoy.
Presiding Officer, and I thank the Public Finance Minister for advance sight of his statement. We know that this Government does not like being reminded that in recent years it has secured record settlements from Westminster and that it is duty-bound to balance its budget. So, at a time of SNP cuts and tax rises, cuts to areas such as colleges and employability schemes, we found out that from today's provisional outturn report that there is a growing underspend as a result of decisions taken by Scottish ministers. The SNP have repeatedly underspent their budget, this year to the tune of £557 million, almost double the year before. That is money that could have been put to vital use by ministers. It could have met repeated calls to pass on in full rates relief for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. That would have saved jobs and businesses now lost, and delivered tax receipts which are now faltering. It could have provided support to Scotland's underfunded councils, which were this year forced to impose double-digit council tax increases, and that would have saved money for hard-pressed households. Today's report also proves that ministers are continuing to pursue the wrong economic and fiscal priorities, with the Government confirming the Scottish Fiscal Commission's projection of an £851 million shortfall in Scotland's tax take. That is a black hole that will have to be reckoned with in 2027 and 2028. So isn't it, therefore, Minister, deeply regrettable that money which could have been spent last year on saving jobs, supporting councils and delivering growth to drive much-needed tax revenues, that money will now be spent in future years on the negative social and economic costs of these repeated SNP policy failures and misplaced priorities?
Minister.
Wow. Oh, Murdo Fraser's applauding. And I thought Murdo Fraser knew better. It's quite embarrassing to come on and listen to Craig Hoy demonstrate his complete inability to understand the whole fundamental concepts of what's going on in today's statement. He does, or should understand, of course, that funding isn't lost, it simply moves into this year's budget. He should understand that it's just over 1% of the total budget that we have to spend. It's actually less than the equivalent underspend in England, in which his party was under control for most of that year, which was 1.3%. He will understand that that money flows into 25-26 to support the budget we're taking forward this year. None of that money is lost. Craig Hoy clearly doesn't understand that and how it works. He doesn't understand the management that goes into taking that, steering that, underspend in the budget outturn to within 1% of the total budget, and that just another demonstration of why the Conservative Party, with Craig Hoy pretending to be their finance spokesperson, are not fit for office in this Parliament.
Michael Mara.
Can I thank the Minister for advance sight of the statement? I must say, I do find it increasingly worrying that SNP over recent weeks opposing above-average spending increases on defence, given the headlines that we've seen in recent days. But it is thanks to the Labour Government's record investment that the signs are good, that perhaps we won't have a chaotic in-year emergency budget this year. But given the SNP's financial record, who knows? But the question now is, of course, delivery. All of these stats out today, all of them out today, and the First Minister is nodding, so he must know what's coming. Atrocious A&E waiting times, atrocious. The worst cancer waiting times on record. Domestic abuse statistics at a near 50-year high. House building rates plummeting. It's obvious, Presiding Officer, that under the SNP, Scotland is going in the wrong direction. So what is the SNP actually going to do to turn Labour's record investment into delivery?
Minister. Well, Michael Mara knows that this Government is completely focused on delivery, and we give that our highest priority to meet our objectives. He should, of course, know, and it was in my statement, that Scotland's economy grew faster than the rest of the UK last year. We've got significantly lower unemployment in Scotland than the rest of the UK, and higher average earnings. So, in terms of economic growth, this budget is delivering. In terms of our other priorities on the climate situation, I've already outlined the situation in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK, where we continue to be a leader. And in public service, we are absolutely focused on delivering, on tackling those waiting lists, which are too high, and got the commitment from this Government to bring those down significantly over the coming months, and we'll continue to focus on that. And the resources that we have at a play are the uncertainty that comes with the way that the UK Government operates its budget, and the late adjustments and consequentials make that difficult. But despite that, that, we managed to allocate resources as appropriate to deliver for the people of Scotland, and will continue to do so.
Paul McLennan, to be followed by Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Minister highlighted higher economic growth in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK. Can he outline areas of expenditure in outturn 24-25 that helped create the competitive economic advantage for the Scottish economy?
Yes, I can. The Scottish Government has sought to secure and leverage competitive advantage for our economy through our budget and priorities for growth. The offshore wind sector, for example, in 24-25 outturn supported the green economy and future jobs by kick-starting our commitment of up to £500 million to anchor a new offshore wind supply chain in Scotland. That's leveraged in private capital investments such as Sumitomo's £350 million cable factory investment at Nigg, and will continue to build on that to unlock growth and innovation across all sectors of our economy in 24-25. We also continue to support the rollout of improved digital connectivity in Scotland by extending gigabit-capable fibre networks right across the country. We have created the conditions for Scotland to be at the heart of the green technology revolution, as well as better connecting our citizens to each other and to digital public services.
Fraser, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. According to the figures we've just seen from the Government, the underspend in the Deputy First Minister's economy and Gaelic portfolio is £106 million. That's a staggering 7.4% of the total budget in that particular department, a department that is responsible for growing the economy, for the enterprise networks, for Visit Scotland, all of which have seen their budgets slashed by the SNP in recent years. So, if growing the economy is so vital to this Government, how does the Minister explain that underspend in this vital spending department?
Minister.
There's a few technical reasons for that. There's the redress relations and response underspend of £36 million, which was following a reclassification by the Office of National Statistics post-year-end. There's also an underspend in the Scottish National Investment Bank of £18 million, and I'm sure Murdo Fraser will understand this point. Deals that come towards being taken forward at the end of the year, you don't want to rush into those. You want to make sure you do those deals properly in the interest of making that investment count effectively, and if those slip into the following year, then that is absolutely to be understood when it comes to making those significant capital investments. And there's also been a slight underspend in relation to the City and Region Deal programme, which, again, with the nature of those multiple programmes across the whole country, you would expect there to be the potential for some slippage in some of those investments. So I think that answers the questions that Murdo Fraser raised.
Rona Mackay, to be followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise whether revised fiscal rules from the UK Government would help borrowing for capital investment?
Minister.
It's really important that we've got the ability to take forward capital investment, and the rules that the UK Government has in place can make that challenge. We've seen fluctuations in capital investment budgets over a number of years, which I've seen reductions and then reinstatement, which has been problematic in being able to predict and understand how we can adequately support the programme of investment that we rightly take forward on behalf of the people of Scotland. So it is important that we have stability with regards to those capital budgets and are able to plan that adequately and securely into the future, and the lack of borrowing powers that the Scottish Government does have, of course, make that difficult, and we would call on the UK Government to enable additional borrowing powers to enable us to plan and execute on those very important investments going forward.
Daniel Johnson, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Could I ask the Minister about the finance and local government line? That shows a £324 million underspend. That represents around 40% of the total cash underspend in this statement. And given that all members will be aware about how hard-pressed local services are, the fact that this was a year that there was a council tax freeze, and the real requirement to find additional money for pay, especially for social care workers, and £300 million would make a substantial contribution to uplift in pay. Why is it that there's an underspend of such a substantial sum in this critical area, given the importance of local services?
Minister.
Yeah, I thought Daniel Jones would have taken the time to interrogate the numbers a bit more thoroughly, and he would have heard in my statement mention of the £350 million underspend that was planned from the spring budget revision in January and carried forward into next year, and that sits in that finance and local government budget line. Local government, in actual fact, overspent by £22 billion in the period 23-24, and that was as a consequence of late approval of the relevant local government pay deal. So far from that being the situation he outlined, we've actually, as I said, slightly overspent in terms of supporting local government and the pay of workers in local government. And the £350 million that he's talking about was identified earlier in the year as part of a planned underspend to move into support 25-26 budget.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Ross Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister confirm that the £557 million of resource underspend is only around 4 days of Scottish Government expenditure, showing the tight levels of financial management carried out by Government, for which he should be commended, with all of it rolled forward into the current financial year? However, capital borrowing was £193 million less than expected due to emerging underspends. Does the Minister agree that having shovel-ready projects in place, such as pothole repairs, which can be undertaken fairly quickly in most places, would help ensure capital is fully utilised should capital underspends emerge in future?
Minister.
Well, first of all, in terms of the point, I thank Kenny Gibson for his kind words in terms of the job that we've done here. However, he's absolutely right. It's only just over 1% of the total spend, and managing that, as I said earlier, a lower underspend percentage than occurred across the rest of the UK. With regards to capital projects, I wish it was that easy, to be honest. Those budgets are obviously allocated to portfolios and then onto agencies and projects. And those projects, of course, don't stop on the 31st of March and then get restarted again in April. They continue on a day-to-day basis. Now, there is some slippage in the expenditure on those projects. The work doesn't stop, and the expenditure needs to carry on as well. So the ability to pull that money back in the last few days, allocate it to something else, and then reallocate it again in April, obviously would be problematic, to say the least. But I do take the point he makes, and the ability to have shovel-ready projects, which we do, to be able to step in when we do have additional spend, is of course an important step that we take.
Ross Greer, to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you. The Minister will be aware of my concern that because many of the Government's costs are essentially fixed at the start of the year, the annual path to balance reallocation exercises place a disproportionate burden on particular portfolios, primarily health and education. And allowing for the fact that there will be an election between now and then, I wonder if the Government would consider in next year's outturn statement publishing alongside it a multi-year analysis of the impact of the path to balance exercises and in which portfolios they fall, perhaps covering the 5 financial years of this parliamentary session.
The member will be aware that the health budget is, of course, protected, and we pass on all consequentials to health. And, of course, health is by far the biggest budget expenditure within the Scottish Government's budget. So clearly the focus on managing health budgets in year is critical to ensuring that we achieve the path to balance and balance our budget as we are required to. And of course there's many moving parts due to consequentials or other changes in year that can influence those budgets. But in the interest of transparency, we're always keen to make as much information available as possible to Parliament and others.
Jamie Green, to be followed by Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think at some point we're going to have a very honest debate in this Parliament about the net income forecast for Scottish income tax, which is reduced by £850 million on outturn versus forecast. But there's another line I was very concerned about to read in this outturn, and that's that of the care allowance reduction. Over £100 million of underspend in that line, yet so many carers in Scotland are facing the harsh reality of difficult finances due to the cliff edge of earnings versus receiving that benefit. Can I ask the Scottish Government is open and willing to look at those thresholds, and if any of that underspend could be used in this financial year, or indeed ring-fenced to support carers doing the vital role that they perform, instead of disappearing that money into next year's clearly fiscal black hole which is sitting in the Scottish Government's accounts?
Minister.
Well, first point on the technical point, he's right to identify that carers allowance was underspent by around about £100 million, but also, if he looks further down, recognise that carer support payments were overspent by almost £100 million. The reason for that is that the first of those is a DWP payment, which was then transferred to Social Security Scotland, who then picked up the payment and incurred that cost as a consequence. So it is very far from being the differential that he identifies. The first point I would make is that in Scotland, I think we're proud of the support we do provide to carers, and secondly, of course, we're always keen to have conversations to see what else we can do to support the very important role that carers perform.
Emma Roddick, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister set out the additional flexibilities contained within the fiscal framework, and could he explain whether he believes they're sufficient to give the Scottish Government the financial levers that it requires?
Minister.
Under the fiscal framework, the Scottish Government can access limited resource and capital borrowing and has the use of the Scotland Reserve. So the Scottish Government's borrowing powers, though improved by the fiscal framework, remain extremely limited. For example, resource borrowing is still limited to address forecast errors in tax or social security payments that cannot be used to fund day-to-day expenditure. And the Scotland Reserve, the current cap on the reserve, limits our ability to carry forward funds into future financial years. We want to work with the UK Government to secure greater fiscal flexibilities to support sound financial management and deal with volatility, and the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government will be discussing these issues further at the forthcoming meeting of the UK Finance Interministerial Standing Committee.
Smith, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you. Minister, just in relation to the answer that you gave to Kenny Gibson when he asked about infrastructure, can I ask specifically about why there is a £72 million underspend in the transport portfolio when there are so many really pressing issues like the dualling of the A9 and various other upgrades?
Minister.
Yeah, the £72 million capital underspend in transport, the £27 million underspend on the road, trunk road network, and that reflects forecast costs across a range of programmes, including the M8 Woodside Viaducts. Propping project faced a number of challenges through the financial year because of the complexities of those works. And if the member hasn't gone to visit those works, I would suggest encourage you to do so, to learn the challenges that doing that work in a city centre location really presents to the excellent teams that are carrying it forward. That work, of course, is reprogrammed into 25-26, so while there's a delay, it doesn't affect the amount of work that gets done. And there is also a rail services underspend, and Network Rail have underspend of £22 million on operations, maintenance and renewals, and that's driven by rephasing of a national Network Rail programmes where costs are allocated to the Scottish region, not something we carry ourselves, obviously.
Jackie Dunbar, to be followed by Fergus Ewing.
The majority of the Scottish Government's funding continues to be tied to the decisions of the United Kingdom Government and is subject to high levels of uncertainty until very late in the financial year. Can the Minister give a practical example of the consequences of Scotland's funding being tied to Westminster?
Minister.
There's always uncertainty in our funding envelope until quite late in the year, given the way finances work for the devolved governments. Receiving clarity on the overall funding position from the UK Government as early as possible is, of course, beneficial for our planning to avoid any last-minute budget reductions and reprioritisations. In 2024-25, while we did receive an update on the in-year position as part of the UK autumn budget, which was, of course, welcome, an element of capital was subsequently reduced in early 2025, 6 weeks before the end of the financial year. We always, therefore, need to maintain an element of contingency to manage those last-minute changes to our overall funding envelope, which reduces investment opportunity.
And Fergus Ewing, brief supplementary.
Presiding Officer, 48 South Street, Elgin was worth £275,000. The Minister's predecessor spent £3.6 million in decarbonising this building. That was by no means alone as an example of an utter waste of money, and the Minister agreed that that was the case. So why has Phase 2 of this fund been approved? Why is it going ahead? Applications were closed in the end of May. Will he report before making any decisions to Parliament about how it's proposed to be spent? And wouldn't it be better spending it on dualling the A9?
Minister.
I take on board the point that the member raises. Clearly, like all spending, we want to make sure it's absolutely spent effectively and efficiently, and I can undertake to report back to Parliament on the specific projects that may or may not be taken forward under that funding line.
Thank you. That concludes the ministerial statement on the budget provisional outturn. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 18070 in the name of Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Education Scotland Bill. I ask any member who wishes to speak to the motion to press their request to speak button. And I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 18070 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. There will be a brief pause before the next item of